Hi, everybody. I'm Walter, I'm the Dutchman, and welcome back to the Smart Performance Podcast, where S stands for self care, M for mindful growth, A for adaptive problem solving, R for rhythmic operation, T, of course, for building your thriving community, and P for performance. I'm really happy to have Clark with me. We're going to talk about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and it's both turnover and retention, and what is the right approach to that. What we're going to talk about is, maybe a little bit out of the box. It might even shake some HR people at the core, but it is time to really, really think about this, and we need to take meaningful actions to change the paradigm. Because we can't continue to go back and do the same thing over and over again, because I think that's what Einstein supposedly had said, because nothing will ever change, and you continue to incur high cost of turnover that is represented not only on your balance sheet, but throughout the organization at large. Clark, thank you very much for joining me in conversation. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
My name is Clark Ingram, and I'm from Austin, Texas. I've got a finance degree from UT Austin, and I've got an MBA from A&M, and I got thrown into HR about 30 years ago.
So that sounds like a nice long journey. And obviously, over that period of time between finance and working in different businesses, you had your highs and lows, but you became very passionate around this one topic. So tell me what happened, right? The pain point. What did you experience and why you feel so passionate about it?
The very first company I ever went to work for was a large industrial service company where we were putting people in refineries doing very technical work. The problem was we were losing all of our senior technicians. They were the backbone of our company. And the problem was that we were losing them very, very quickly. And not only that, but we were also losing them to competition. So they were literally going to our competition to work against us. And so what ended up happening was I got thrown in. I made my CEO happy a couple of times. He figured out I knew how to figure stuff out. And I got thrown in. And within 6 months or so, we had stopped the flow. We had identified our organizationally specific root causes that were happening in that organization. And I'm real big on that, is it's not a cookie cutter approach. You have to figure out what's going on in your company, not what's going on everywhere else. And so what ended up happening was we shut the flow out, stopped the bleeding, right? Just like you do with a trauma patient. And then the next thing you do is you've now gotten rid of all the toxic stuff going on by eliminating them. And now all of a sudden you can recruit. And what ended up happening in that particular situation was all of our guys became our number one recruiters. They started telling everybody, hey, we made all these changes and they're awesome. And we love working for that company now. And so the next thing you knew, we had everybody in our industry coming to our side.
So very interesting. It is, and of course, all of that came with its bumps and lumps along the way because nothing changed suddenly is not easy. But I think that the intrinsic drivers of most people really comes down to reward, recognition, appreciation, having an opportunity for development if they seek that, and of course, money, transparency. So tell me a little bit more about that from your perspective on what are those drivers and how did you address that in trying to solve this problem that you were facing?
Biggest issue we had was not actually how much they were being paid, but how they were being paid. For instance, I believe most companies out there pay on what I call time served. Okay, so you're here for 6 months. We're going to evaluate you and give you a pay raise and all that kind of thing. What I talk about is that what's called a value path. And what we had in that situation, and it works really well, especially as you're developing people, these guys were coming in, they had a mechanical aptitude, but they knew really nothing else about what we did. We then spent a couple of years literally turning them into that senior technician. The problem was that they were leaving about halfway through the process because we were not keeping the compensation up with the value that they were adding to themselves. So it was really kind of interesting. Exxon was our biggest customer. And I talked to the COO one time and he said, well, actually, it's plotted out based on what they learn and everything. Our rate, how much Exxon's paying us, is going up. So the obvious question is, well, why aren't we paying part of that to the guy as he's working up? And that's actually was the number one thing that we had to do was just be able to compensate that guy along with his increased value. And then they had the whole program. And so what ended up happening was once we instituted that, the flow to the competition just literally stopped. One of the other things I'll say, go ahead and say this, is one of the things I talk about is zero turnover. And what's kind of cool about it was the last 5 years I was there, we did not lose a single senior technician. They had nowhere to go. They were making too much money and they were being treated too well by us. Why would they go anywhere? And so you can't have zero turnover for an entire organization. But what happens if all of a sudden you pick out the backbone of your company and you have zero turnover? That's the world. All of a sudden, a restaurant, you no longer have turnover with your chefs and you don't have turnover with your waitresses. You can't get a better situation than that.
Yeah, and it's so sad to think about that, especially I work primarily in healthcare, but I work with across different industries, is that the common turnover rate is somewhere between 20 and 30%, while it really should be at 8.8% or less, right? And, and a zero is even better if it is for the right reasons. The problem is that what I have seen, and I'm sure you have noticed too, that when I ask the finance guy what the actual cost of attrition is, or turnover is, they can tell me that. If I go to the person on the front line and ask that question, they don't know that either. But in reality, the cost is exponential and far more expensive than covering the four things we just talked about, right? Transparency, appreciation, recognition, development, and price transparency, or adding, paying paid by value, so to speak. It is so that is one problem. I worked in the for-profit and a lot of time in non-for-profit. One thing that has shifted, I saw taking place, is that often HR is an outside player and they don't really understand what is taking place, and they're stuck in old models and an old way of thinking. It is when they start putting HR business partners in the business itself, aligned with the executives who actually did and worked alongside, that they started finally comprehending that there's a better way of doing it. So I know that you have tickled the bellies of some HR people along the way. So tell me what you have found to be the disconnect, and why is it that they are upset, but why is it, more importantly, why is your approach better? And of course, that comes down to performance.
Well, I'll start off number one with a big one, and that is what comes first, people or profits? And all the HR people will say it's people in the story. Here's the problem, is that when you say that people, and you put either one of them, people or profits, on top, you're automatically setting up friction. You're automatically getting this between the two groups. If what you do, this is what and if you'll look at the logo of my company, People Profits, it's people profits with an infinity sign holding them together. Because what I have found is if you make them co-equals and you get people and profits to work together, amazing things happen. Now, unfortunately, the HR people get very upset about that because they've all been indoctrinated into this people. And for instance, that company I was talking about a moment ago, when I went to work for them, they were about 200 million. When I left, they were at 1.4 billion. And they had basically bought a bunch of other companies that were struggling because we had figured out. Now, there was lots of things that happened. Okay, it wasn't just turnover, but turnover was a major piece of the puzzle and everything. I think the other thing is engagement. People do not engage because of awesome cultures and ping pong tables and taco trucks. They engage, and we know this. Number one, the basic foundation of an employment relationship is money. You have to get the money right up front, and you got to be able to communicate that to them. And then from there, you get into things like integrity, respect, transparency, alignment of values. Get that employee in that company, get that employee to understand exactly how what he does makes that company better and gets them to where their mission is going. Personal development, professional development. All of those, we know that. There's all kinds of studies that tell us the same thing over and over again. But for some reason, HR people are saying, no, it's taco trucks and ping pong tables. And if you go to Gallup polling, They have an employee engagement graph over the last 40 years. It's flat. And it's flat because we're on the wrong path. We need to get where we need to be.
Yeah, I think we need to have some real difficult conversations, and I think that happens on the organizational level too. Is that HR has been it has been disconnected from the real work that takes place, and there's no place more evident as a new manager wants to hire for a position, new or a replacement, and they ask for the job to be open in HR. They post a job description, and the job description barely represents what the actual job is about. And so when I work with clients, I said, listen, be very smart about this. One of the first questions in an interview is ask what this job is actually about.
Right.
That gap needs to be closed, and people need to start thinking a little bit out of the box and out of the norm. So I can't wait to share this, just talk with some of my HR leaders that I have in an HR professional group to get them to really be part of the conversation. Right? We cannot disregard them. We just need to get them and guide them to think a little different. Good Job Strategies, right, is a book that came out not too long ago and talks about the rate of promotion, the rate of overtime, and the rate of development. All of these things matter, but none of it matters more than what you just talked about. Right? If people don't feel valued, if people don't feel respected, engagement means nothing. And
Right.
and I have a simple equation with that. Right? In high performance employee, a high performance team requires two elements: trust, and it's non-negotiable. And then it is about engagement. But if if you don't spend enough time in building that trust, and that comes with price transparency and making people feel valued, it just really depends. So you told me you wrote a book. Tell me a little bit about the book itself and what are the core principles.
Well, what I ended up doing was that there's certain things I believe, and they're quite a bit different than HR. And I'd been blogging about it for some time. So just before COVID, I released a book that was basically the blog that had gotten the best responses and stuff. And then what ended up happening is after COVID, unfortunately, I timed it perfectly wrong. I couldn't have done it worse if I tried. You know how that works. And so then I decided that, okay, I kept being told by people who read it that, hey, this got some good stuff in it. And so then what I ended up doing was I started working with booklaunchers.com, and I just wanted to make my book better. And they did a great job. But the main thing that they said was, Clark, you've got more in your head than you've got in the book right now. And so they said, get it all out, wring it out. And so that's what I did. And what I try to do is I try to keep the theory limited, okay? And you have to know certain things in theory and agree on certain things in theory. But then the rest of the book, I try my best to be very, very practical, okay? I'm not trying to get consulting work. I'm trying to show people that this is how you need to be doing this, and here we go. And so that's what the book is really all about. It's called Churn. As everybody knows, in the C-suite, the word churn is always a bad word. Doesn't matter what you're churning, it's always a bad thing. And it's on Amazon and basically anywhere online that you need to get that. Obviously, I'm the author. But what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to get people to realize there's a lot of things that HR does that doesn't work. And it's just not getting us the results but at the very same time, here I am, I'm getting the results. When I came to work where I am right now, we cut turnover by 42% in 6 months. We went and took staffing from mid 80s to mid 90s. We got rid of 2/3 of our temporaries, et cetera, et cetera. And the average HR person, when I say that to them, their eyes get really big and they're like, "What? How did you do that?" And the truth of the matter is, it's not that difficult. And it's in the book. I've got it written. It's relatively easy to follow.
It is. So with that said, give me a single first step, a real action step that people can take other than buying your book today to start this journey of rediscovery and getting things right. So what is one actionable step people can take?
What makes you special as an employer? Okay. And again, organizationally specific. That's another major difference between me and HR is that I always talk about your company. Okay. There's something about your company that makes you special, why people would want to come work for you. If you want to know, go talk to your core employees and ask them the question, what are the 5 reasons you work here? Okay. So here at the hospital, we're a regional hospital on the northern side of New Hampshire. And I went out and I don't know how many responses I ended up getting. We've got almost 1,000 employees here. And I got quite a few in, but there was one word, and that was community. This was started as a community hospital. And even though it's no longer a community hospital, it's now a regional hospital, they still want that in. That's the most important thing. We're taking care of our neighbors, our friends, our loved ones, etc. And that's what we want people to buy into. Okay, buy into the fact that you're here to help this community get better. Okay. And that's the number one thing I talk to employers about. Figure out and really get brutally honest with yourself. What is special about you? One of the other stories I tell is there's a town in Oklahoma, and one street, you've got every single plumber in town lined up, literally right in a row. Okay. But one is new construction plumbing. The other one is retro residential. In other words, fixing faucets and stuff like that. Another one is a commercial. Now, the kind of guy who's going to go work for those different companies is a different person.
Mm-hmm.
A person that's going to be who's going to enjoy helping mom fix her faucet is a completely different guy that's working on that new residential, laying out the lines for that new house. And that's the whole point. That's what you're really trying to get to.
Yeah. So I refer to that as the true intrinsic values of each person, right? We do global things, and that misses the boat by 50-60%, right? That's why I'm always a big proponent of doing a 9-step talent review, which is very individualized. And then based on that, you have to drive that through the intrinsic value to understand what the person wants. Just because I identify you as a future leader doesn't mean that you want to be a future leader. You might want to be. We do know that if we have owners versus renters, that the owners will always beat the renters. So why do we have so many temporary employees? Listen, we could talk about this for hours. It's very interesting. Where can we find?
I have a website called People Profits, and again, my 2 sides of my business now is speaking and books. I really don't do any more consulting. This is my last consulting gig here. And then the other thing, like I said a little bit earlier, if you go to Amazon, Churn by Clark A. Ingram, you'll find it there. We've got the usual array of different types of books and all that kind of thing.
Okay. And that's peopleprofits.com, or is it a different?
Yes, peopleprofits.com.
Just want to make sure that the show notes reflect that, right?
You can also find me on LinkedIn.
That's a wonderful thing. Hey, Clark, thank you very much for being here. What is your parting thought?
My parting thought is this is fixable. And just as you said a little bit earlier, millions of dollars. When I got here to the hospital, the very first thing I did was calculate, and it came out to be about $2 million. And here we've cut it by now 50%. Okay, so we've made $1 million. I've been paid over multiple times. And one of the things I'm trying to get people to understand, that's my real message. It's all fixable. Employee turnover is fixable. Recruiting is fixable. The problem is you're going to have to think outside the HR box.
Yeah, and I think that is powerful words. I'll let that stand on its own. Again, to the audience, listen, great conversation, really valuable insight. We have some resources to dive into, but again, take the advice. Take one single step today, and then put it onto your calendar, and you stay with it. Because if you don't, again, this conversation is forgotten by the next morning, and that's all of a waste, of course. Thank you for being here. Come back for the next episode. Visit me at the Apple Store. Download the Dutch Mentor app. It will help you gain traction, go on your journey of success, whatever success looks like, because you're the one who is going to define what value is in your eyes. Clark, thank you very much for being here, and we'll see everybody real soon.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.